Members, we've reached the appointed hour and we have a quorum. Meeting is now called to order. Please take your seat according to the sitting plan because you need to press a button to ask questions. The latest list of outstanding items and also list of follow-up actions. Paper CB1 738 1920-01 and 738 1920-02 have been sent to members. Information paper issued since last meeting. There is none. Item 3. Innovation, technology development, and re-industrialization policy in Hong Kong. Let us invite the officials in the room. Members would like to ask questions, please press button. If I may welcome the Policy Secretary and his team for attending the meeting. I also welcome members from the IT panel and broadcasting panel for attending the meeting as well. The administration has provided paper CB1 738 1920-03 for reference, and then the Secretariat has also provided information paper CB1 738 1920 bracket 04 for members' reference. At the previous meeting, members are proposed to ask deputations to make submissions. 19 so far have been received, and they have been circulated among members. If I may invite the Secretary to introduce the paper and also respond to the submissions. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the panel. I'm glad to attend today's panel on commerce industry and report to members the development, the innovation, technology development, and related real industrialization policy. I'd like to thank the groups and individuals for submitting their views to this panel. They have specifically referred to infrastructure, manpower, R&D, support to SMEs, so on and so forth. And they have made valuable suggestions. They also support government's efforts in innovation technology development. In the past 3 years, we have been committed to the 8 directions outlined by the policy address, and we've put in more than $100 billion, showcasing our determination. The government has been implementing green technology, developing, making use of new technology. The steering committee chaired by the chief executive has been monitoring the progress of various I&T development efforts. In the discussion paper, we have listed the work of the ITB in terms of increasing funding, nurturing talents, promoting culture, I&T culture, and also re-industrialization. To encourage industries to engage in more R&D, we have provided a 2-tier tax deduction system, or tax arrangement, and through the various schemes under ITF and of the ITC, we promote technology, R&D, technology transfer, and realization of research. We have extended a scheme to all companies under engaging in R&D, and through the scheme, they can make use of the new technology developed by local R&D companies. Hong Kong has successfully made use of local technology and R&D products. For example, electronic wristband, and also the nano decontamination arrangements. We adopt a 3-pronged approach to strengthen our manpower pool. We have the research program. We have the research postdoctoral hub and also research program. We also provide more R&D posts locally to retain talents. We are also attracting more technology talents to come to Hong Kong. Quality infrastructure is also very important in facilitating I&T. We are now promoting the Inno-Hong Kong research clusters. We are also reviewing the demand for R&D facilities. Apart from funding the science park and developing the R&D facilities, we are also working hard on expanding the science park, Cyberport 5, and also the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Technology Park in the loop to respond to the call for more R&D facilities. Last month, with the President of the Finance Committee, we allocated $2 billion to the Science Park to develop microelectronics center and also establish a fund for re-industrialization, encouraging manufacturers to have smart production in Hong Kong. With all these measures and efforts of various stakeholders, we have a very vibrant I&T ecology or ecosystem. Yet we still have a lot of room for improvement. In formulating relevant policies and measures, we will listen humbly to your advice and also the views of the stakeholders. I and my colleagues are happy to answer members' questions. Thank you. Good. Thank you to the Secretary, and the floor is open to members. 5 minutes each for questions and answers. First, Ms. Elizabeth Cutt. Now, because of the COVID-19 epidemic, many companies in Hong Kong have speeded up the process of digitalization. Now, in the past, you really couldn't force them to do so. Now, if they can't do their business in actual space, they can go into the digital markets. Digitalization enables them to explore a much bigger market, and that is also funding the DBITs. But is the administration too hasty in implementing that? And I have received some complaints. First, as for the companies that can provide service, the criteria of the list are rather strange. Some outstanding companies have not been in the list. Later, you've added more to the list. It seems that everybody can join the list. In the past, there were people who jumped the gun. To do publicity, you need to follow that up. The dissemination of information is also confusing. At the start, it was said that each company is 3 items and $100,000 per item, and that will be full coverage. But the final approval was different. The budget had been cut for many companies. And they might just get a few $1,000s or some tens of thousands of dollars. And they had to fork out $30,000 first, and they could only get the money back after the audited reports. That will be an extra burden on them. Many companies want to apply, and quite a large number of companies have applied. I hope the administration will put in a higher stake, maybe up to, or maybe add another $1 billion. But as for these shortcomings or loopholes, I hope the administration will deal with them so that the businesses can get the money so that they can be helped. And there are certain things which are rather exaggerated. Say a solution may be just costing $10 or a few $1,000s. But since there is a cap, which is higher than that amount, then they just blow up the numbers. For those that are exaggerations, you shouldn't approve that much. Yet, for those who really need the money, they feel that those who give the approval don't know how to make the approval or set the criteria. Say some apply for VDI. The approval was document digitalization and the like. So it didn't match. Some companies feel that there were problems in the approval process and the approval was incorrect or inappropriate. I've received quite a number of complaints. I hope the Bureau or the authorities will take this opportunity, improve the scheme. I hope more money can be added, and the whole approval process can be improved. The Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Quat, for the question, and also the view, as said by Ms. Quat. The business, or rather the pandemic, has given us a challenge and has given us a chance to promote digitalization. Through Digitech, the businesses could continue their business. The DBIS is very popular among the businesses. Within a month or so, the number of applications has far exceeded our expectation to the tune of 13,000 cases. We've seen there is such a demand. We feel that there is a demand, and we will seek more resources so that the DBIS can be improved and can help more SMEs. And we also hope that the IT sector will provide a better service to the small businesses. I am aware of the problems raised by, or the situation raised by Ms. Quat. The use of public funds effectively is the issue. The DBs, we hope, will help the businesses appropriately. It should be a suitable project, and the amount applied for should be reasonable. And the staff members or the businesses, or rather the service providers, will provide suitable service to the SMEs. Now, the vetting committee or approval committee will have to adjust the item and also the amount so that they are reasonable. We will review the system from time to time so as to provide a better service in terms of digital conversion. I think you need to add more members to your approval committee because you have more than 10,000 cases. How can you rely on the present small number of people? Now, if an application $100,000, you only approve a few $1,000s, then should they embark on that or not is really difficult. You need to think about it.
Thank you, Ms. Quat, for the opinion. Chan Chen-ying. Thank you, Chair. Now, the goal is for the government before the end of the 5-year term to increase the GRD to 1.5%, that is expenditure on R&D as percentage of GDP to 1.5%. It increased from 0.75% to 0.85% in the past years. And I really do not know whether the Secretary is confident that the expenditure can be increased to 1.5% by the end of the current term of the government. Where do you see you can increase expenditure so that you can reach that target? That's the first question. Secondly, with the measures and policies from the government, we believe that the culture for INT and innovation is increasing, but we must not be completely complacent. Now, we're talking about 0.86% for Hong Kong, but this is far behind South Korea, Singapore, and other countries. Well, it's been given to me as an answer that they also spend on national security as part of their expenditure for INT. But I take that point. But on the other hand, for biotech, where we have certain competitive edge, can we perhaps set up some long-term research centers so as to increase our expenditure in R&D? Now, another question, the government restrictions sometimes become, or regulations become restrictions for testing and R&D, for example, in auto driving. So for the policies, perhaps, and also the administrative measures, they become dated and they become a bottleneck for R&D. How does the government tackle these questions, please? Well, actually, there is a very clear target for R&D expenditure. We wanted to reach 1.5% of GDP, and in the past 3 years, there had been significant increase and bringing on changes. But of course, any change would take time to actually be implemented. The government had put in 100 billion in promoting I&T and R&D, and there are other areas. Tax concessions, for instance, is another measure. There's super tax concession for R&D expenditure. For the first 3 million, there is a 300, or first 2 million, there is a 300% tax concession. After that, it is a 200% tax concession. So the private enterprises will have to see this attractive measure and do its bit. So from the government's input and also in terms of our measures and policy, we will be putting all these into play to promote R&D. Now, just now, there's been a question asked about government regulations restricting certain technology R&D. I see that as well. And that's why there is a steering committee which also looks at the possibility of changing or amending certain laws. And I myself is also working with other bureaus and departments in making changes. For example, in digital entertainment, for instance, we've had some policy changes so that the industry can be promoted in terms of its growth. And so there is a lot more work along these lines to do. We have to admit that sometimes laws lag behind social development. This is an objective fact. So within the government, together with the efforts of the industry, how can we push through these hurdles? We're very happy this time to see a lot of organizations writing in, giving us written submission. As Mr. Chan had mentioned, we will be humbly listening to all these opinions. So apart from the Bureau, which is pushing ahead with the work, we will be working with other bureaus and departments as well. Everybody wants to see the targets reached as soon as possible, but I emphasize that we need concerted efforts because any change will bring on certain pros and also cons. How can we have a consensus within our Hong Kong community is key, and communication is very important therein. Those who are impacted, they should not oppose the new measures, and but we will need communication and persuasion. It is not just up to the government which can bring on all these changes. Mok Nai Kwong. Charles Mok. Chair, this document seems familiar. The content of it talks basically about infrastructure and also R&D, how much funding had been expensed, etc., etc. But there are some very important parts which are not mentioned. For example, government purchasing, opening up the purchasing policy, how many SMEs have benefited, how much more business have they done. So this is important too. It's not just about putting in expenditure into R&D. How has the market been stimulated? How you've done all that work, but it's not reflected in the paper. And then there is the technology coupon. What is the progress there, and what are the future plans? You have not talked about that in the paper as well. You can include those as well. So we do not have to just limit ourselves to I&T development and re-industrialization policy and just talk about R&D and infrastructure. Well, in terms of breaking the bottlenecks, it is too slow. You know, Mr. Sid, you have also mentioned we have to build consensus in the community. But if you want 100% consensus, yes, there will have to be discussions and persuasions. We cannot bulldoze over anything. But on the other hand, you should have some incentives, some policies to break the bottleneck or to solve the problem. Otherwise, they will be just standing still and not agreeing. For transport and traffic, for example, it took a consultant and also the electronic automobiles in the science park to start, or the or the electric bicycles to have been started in the science park. It took me 5 years to push that through. And then last week, there was another legislation or policy about leasing out of rooms. That also took me 5 years. Not only was there not a liberalization of the measures, in fact, it was made more strict than before. Well, a lot of things have been in discussion for 5 years, but they have all come to naught. So you have to give us a direction to see that any legislative change can really bring on fruition. Now, there are a couple of things which are very good here, and that is GS1 and the computer network. These are submissions that are given to the LegCo. They all talk about talents. There are other submissions which talk about talents as well, I think, but these are very good submissions. We're not just talking about students and STEM, but also on-the-job training. That is very important for nurturing talents. The Singaporean experience is very good as a reference. I'll not talk about in detail here, but in the future, you really have to look at their experience. And in Hong Kong, I'm sure we can do that as well. Now, General Chamber of Commerce talked about something that is very relevant, legislation. They say that, or they propose a sandbox approach. And this is not just about the financial sector, but in other sectors as well. Of course, you have so many bureaus and departments. Not all of them can make their own decisions, but you are the liaison point. You are the coordination point so that you push them into action. So perhaps each of the departments can have, including Home Affairs and Transport, can have their sandboxes. If FSTB can do that, that is the Hong Kong MA can do that. Why not other departments and bureaus in instituting sandbags? And use Hong Kong ICT first in the purchasing policy. I remember in the beginning, there was 10 whole years ago at the Science Park, myself and others, we have been talking about that, and that was 10 long years ago. I mean, why don't you talk about all these in the paper? This is all very good and beneficial for you. And if you look at the papers in the past 10 years, you will see a lot of all these points I've mentioned, talked about before. So can you talk about the future? Give us a vision for the future so that things will come into fruition. As for the Sea Steering Committee, it was set up in 2017, and it's not moved an iota for changing legislation. Well, Mr. Mok's expectations for us, we totally understand. I just want to provide some information. For example, it was mentioned for government purchasing, we should lead the way to help the technology companies. And that is exactly what we've done. Last year, on the 1st of April, we have come up with a new procurement policy. It is exactly because we heard the voices of the community, and last year we've made the change. And secondly, Charles Mok talked about talents being very important. Exactly so. We have to, therefore, push forward with training of talents. And in the past, we have had some relevant policies. In the paper, it's been mentioned, our re-industrialization programs in 2018. It was introduced. And this year, for our helping young people to set up the researcher hub and also the postdoc hub. All these are to help the young people in entering the industries. And these are efforts that we have instituted because we have heard the voices of the community and we have been hearing the voices. And we need time and process to formulate policies. We understand the urgency that you feel, and we will try our very best, and we have been doing so. And we will spare no efforts in doing so that our society at large and our industries can benefit. Shu Ka-fei? Yes, I would want to talk about the epidemic. And during the epidemic, the government had come up with some support for the retail sector and matching them up with IT companies, and there's funding that they can apply for. And for each item, maximum of 100,000 is available. And for my own sector in the retail, I can hear that there are voices and people are very welcoming of online promotions. Well, there had been IT companies which have been applying for this kind of funding together with the retail sector. How many IT companies? What? Is it 8,000 IT companies? I heard 8,000 IT companies. Perhaps Ms. Kwok can supplement. Well, I heard that some 2,000 IT companies had accessed this particular scheme of funding. And this is very encouraging. And the Secretary, Mr. Young, before had introduced these programs. And in the recent past, there had been people telling me that they have made the application and there had been some approvals. Now, the government was thinking 500 million in total, but some people were afraid that there may be some submissions or applications which will be disappointed. I have heard that there had been some approvals in the recent past, but on the other hand, they fall short of the total amount applied for. Let's say $30,000 in application becomes just a few $1,000s. And so given that the IT companies and also the retailers are at a loss as to why that is the case. Perhaps Mr. Sit can respond to this and perhaps assure the retail sector the government can perhaps provide more funding. If 500 million is one match, perhaps add 2 more matches. So 500 million times 3, how about that? And this will benefit the sector, including the retail sector. A lot of entities in my sector are very expectant of this. Well, thank you very much for the opinion. And Chairman, for remote business operation, for this scheme, we understand that the SMEs will have to upgrade their IT, but they cannot find the right entities to help them, and they had no previous experience in this regard. So before we started the program, we first of all came up with a list for service providers. As mentioned earlier, we have over 2,000 companies which are already in this reference list of service providers to help our SMEs in getting the relevant service. I emphasize that this is but a reference list. There are organizations or companies which feel that they do not need to join this list, but they are already they have sufficient business contacts and are trustworthy that they can go their own way as well. Now, this is very much welcome and popular among the businesses. And there had been 13,000 applications so far. And in vetting the applications, we have to be assured that our public funding is appropriately, reasonably, and rightfully used. And the business will have to deploy the public funding for their business use. It cannot be deployed for other unrelated use. And also the applied fund must be reasonable, and also the IT has to be used appropriately. And in this process, it is also true that I do see that our adjudicators say that some of the applications do not really meet our criteria. So in order for the appropriate spending of public money, we mete out or we approve a proportion of the funding applied for, and we would explain to the applicant as well so that they will use the public funding well. Now, I've heard the views just now, and the industry had also reminded us in increasing the 500 million to a higher number. We've heard that voice, and we will proactively respond to that so as to satisfy the SMEs in raising their IT capabilities.
And I hope this will assist the businesses so that they can have better prospects. Yes, I hope you will sincerely consider adding more money. Many IT companies will have businesses, and that will help to improve the retail environment in Hong Kong. Yes, we'll try best to get more money. Mr. Yu Xiuwing, with regard to the postdoctoral hub and the researcher program, about $1.5 billion have been given to the two programs. Yet, according to the report, the number of R&D personnel is rather small. It is just half that of Singapore in terms of proportion. It's 2.4 to 1 in terms of research students. That is also much lower than the UK, which is 4 times. Let us not try to set the target at par with Singapore or the UK. But do you have any targets in terms of research personnel? Now, in June 2018, the administration launched the Technology Talent Admission Scheme. What is the progress so far? In January, it was said that you also expanded to cover companies outside the Science Park and the Cyberport. So, with the introduction of these new measures, do you think there's still room for improvement? And what are the areas of improvement so that we can enhance our talent pool? Next is on the cooperation in the Greater Pearl River Delta area, or GBA. Now, our population is limited, and the GBA have a bigger population and have more space. And will the administration work with the GBA on specific items? What are they? Is there a timetable? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Yu. Talent is very important to the to I&T development. It starts with STEM at school. It also is about helping students, graduate students. We have the researcher program and also postdoctoral hub program. We also have training programs. Apart from training local talents, we also need to bring in talents outside Hong Kong. To answer Mr. Yu's question, should we set a target? We don't have that at present. But I fully agree with Mr. Yu that we should set targets. Let me stress one point. Apart from assisting young people to join the I&T industry or sector, we also need to have a good ecosystem so that young people having graduated from the universities will have a bright prospect for their career development. Otherwise, they will move on to other sectors or industries, and that takes time, and we will do that. The Permanent Secretary will speak on this as well. Thank you, Chairman. Just now, Mr. Yu referred to the program, the ratio of R&D personnel. We have heard the view of Mr. Yu, and we will consider how to set the target. As for the number of personnel working in the I&T industry or sector, we've set target in 2014. There were about 30,000. When the Bureau was set up, we set a target hoping that in this year, 2020, the number would reach 42,600. And the number or target could only be, or rather the statistics can only be done at the end of the year. But in 2018, the number already reached 41,500. So we are around 42,000. We have put money into various funding programs and also put money into R&D. So they are contributing to achieving target, and more young people are attracted into I&D, I&T sector. And we will consider whether we set the target for R&D personnel. As for cooperation with the GBA, our positioning is in terms of the two research clusters. They will focus on health and also on artificial intelligence and robotics. In fact, we complement the GBA, Mr. Yeo, with regard to talents. Now, since the extradition bill, many mainland students have left Hong Kong. What will the change on our talent pool? And will that affect our continuity in terms of nurturing the pool of talents? I hope you will give us a paper. Yes, we'll conduct research into that and report to the panel. Next, Ms. Chiang. The topic before us is a big one and is very important to Hong Kong. It is I&T development and re-industrialization policy. It affects our GDP, our growth. Will there be growth? Just now, the Secretary said that over $100 billion have been spent on this topic. We didn't put much into R&D. We have not reached 1.5% of GERD. Or GRD is 1.5% of GDP. That will be about $40 to $50 billion. If our GDP is already 30,000 billion. It seems that you're just throwing money at the problem. We have seen that you have a long list. Say auto products, nanotechnology, microelectronics center. We put $2 billion into that. The previous secretary referred to or proposed robotics and then e-sports. I know you want to encourage the business sector to engage in I&T, and you want to nurture more people, but I think you lack direction and positioning. Many groups have submitted their views. As for the Manufacturers Association, the first topic and the second topic on the positioning of a re-industrialization policy, number one, and also forward-looking industrial policy. What is our position? What is our industrialization policy? Well, in the industry policy, the Secretary, you are new to the seat and you are given this heavy burden. I think it should be your pride. You have a strong sense of mission. Now, if you have 10 children, you can only rely on the goodwill of heaven, and then 2 out of 10 have good achievements. Yet, if you have only 1 or 2 children, then you focus all your efforts on nurturing your 2 children. Now, that's an analogy. Go back to the issue. Now we have a long list in front of us. Now you will give money, whether it is 100 billion or 200 billion dollars. We will approve the funding, and we hope that there will be great achievements. Yet we don't know what's in store for Hong Kong. You may have many children, and there is no achievement. Now, before we pass away, we'll see whether there are good results or not. So I sincerely hope that you will consider this very carefully. Now, consider this. What are the advantages of Hong Kong over our neighboring territories? What INT industries should we develop? In fact, Ms. Chiang's wish is also the direction in which the whole Bureau has been working on. We need to capitalize on our existing traditional industries, and we also need to employ INT to nurture new industries and assist the further development or improvement of our traditional industries. It's not Hong Kong's advantage, but Hong Kong's advantageous INT sector or industry. Yes, we can see that we have a potential advantage in health science, and therefore we have the health at Info HK, and we can refer to the numbers to support that. Just now, the Permanent Secretary referred to the number of personnel in the INT sector, and our investment in INT rose from $1.4 billion to nearly $20 billion in 2018. We have strength in R&D. Next, Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Chairman, in the past year or so, Hong Kong has been suffering from damages arising from violence and also from the epidemic. We rely on technology to maintain our links with the outside world, say virtual exhibition, virtual purchasing. The government has a fund to provide assistance. I think the fund may have been exhausted. More money should be added. INT help us in terms of our economic development and other kinds of development in the future.
And we see the Sino-US trade conflict. A lot of the issues are based on controversies over technology. I also note that if we do not rely on our own strengths, but instead just beg for external help, this will not do in the long run. These external parties at some point might bite you or kick you out. You see, in our country, there are a lot of innovations which are leading in the world. 5G is one. We are leading, and we are being criticized because these other countries are lagging behind. And if we talk about Hong Kong, our own Hong Kong, space travel, for instance, there are plastic parts that are manufactured in Hong Kong in that space shuttle, even though it is but a small part, but it is still a very high-tech product. Chairman, what I'm trying to say here is that, as I've mentioned just now, how can we attract young people to pitch themselves into INT? And this has to do with our policy. How do we attract mature people, adults, or young people or people in the business sector to industrial or re-industrialize Hong Kong. This is all about policy again. So do not just say the moon in the US is rounder and brighter, but rather I think we have very bright opportunities for development, especially after the epidemic. The development and growth in the Greater Bay region would give us a lot of opportunities. Now, Secretary, I have a question. Locally, you want to attract more people to come to Hong Kong for development and also to bring back a lot of the industries. But as far as I can see, I do not find that your policies are attractive or flexible enough. You are saying that I cannot give you concessions here and there, lots of restrictions. But if you look at neighboring countries, they give concessions in land, in tax, financing. Can Hong Kong not do the same? The Greater Bay Area and its development, how can the young people, through your leadership, Mr. Secretary, to understand the development opportunities therein? And when they know more, they will find their own opportunities. So I think we need to put in more efforts. I would like to know from the Secretary, in these regards, as I've mentioned just now, do you have certain guidance to give us? For example, in concessions, as I've mentioned just now. Please don't say that we'll think about it or we can't do it. I hope you'll give us a commitment that you will do that. And only by so doing, you'll be able to help Hong Kong to go forward. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lam, for the opinions. Now, Mr. Lam was correct in saying that for an area, for there to be INT development, government policy is very important. We're talking about the science park, a lot of concession schemes, infrastructure to attract young scientists and to settle them so that they know that they have a place where they can plant their roots to do their work. And also, we are helping to transition university graduates in coming into the sector for employment. And I've talked about those projects and schemes just now. Now, as for attracting industries back to Hong Kong, especially for those that are high value added, we need the relevant policies and the funding. We would want the LegCo to support us in our re-industrialization funding. And we have some policy support in attracting the industrialists to come back. We have a matching fund, highest 15 million payout, and it is 1-to-2. That is to say, the industrialists would provide, let's say, 30 million, let's say, then the government would provide 15 million in matching. Now, let's say if the industrialists say that there's something that's very expensive, let's say in microelectronics, then the government is proposing a center where there is sharing of this resource of microelectronics. And also it was mentioned, the Greater Bay Area, this is indeed a very big opportunity and an engine for growth so that Hong Kong's economy can pick up again. And I've been talking to a lot of people within the sector, and one of the things that's been mentioned is exactly as Mr. Lam had mentioned. We have to bring our young people into the Greater Bay Area so that they will know about the opportunities there. For our young scientists and young entrepreneurs, we're going to bring them to the different cities in the Greater Bay Area so that they can commercialize and convert some of their research for commercial application so that this is a complementary relationship between Hong Kong and the Bay Area. Charles Mok? Right. I'm looking at your postdoctoral hub, and you say that there had been 580,000 million that is provided in terms of funding. Now, every person, it seems, would be given a funding of about $30,000, and there will be a few years, or perhaps totaling $400,000 in total for each individual. But for BDITs, the total is about 500 million. Oh, I made a mistake just now. It is 2,000 companies or so in that reference list. I do not know. That's been lengthened because the deadline is not until June 6th. And the number of applications in total is 13,000. Perhaps one company can put in more than one applications, but easily you're talking about 5,000, 6,000 companies applying for the fund. On the one hand, we want a lot more talents. So for one doctoral person, you're giving the person over 3 years perhaps $400,000, $500,000. But for the BD's funding, you're giving drips and drabs. They're applying for, let's say, $30,000. You may be giving out a few $1,000s to these applicant companies. Yes, some of them have jacked up the cost maybe in their application. But on the other hand, for these applicants, in their application for $100,000, for example, if you only satisfy a portion of their application in funding, it is not clear where they need to fork out their own money and what part of the production should be covered by the granted funding. Their cash flow is difficult, as you understand. You know, you've given them an expectation that they'll be able to get all the funding, $100,000, say. But now you're saying that there are too many applicants, so each company can be only given what? I don't know, much less. They understand that. And they understand that there is an oversubscription of the fund, and the granting of the fund or the vetting process will take long. But on the other hand, for a company which had applied for $100,000 and you're giving them, what, $3,000 for funding after the vetting. And this is just a small part. And the panel of adjudicators seem to be saying, this is all you need, this small part of your procedure. This is all that you need. Well, these are some of the criticisms. They say, I quote, this is completely a lie. It is about 20%, 30% of the funding that we have applied for, and we are diverting resources, including manpower, to make the application, and our business suffer because of that. Now, at the time, the government was saying 10 days for the vetting and 100% subsidy. The webinar held before by the government talked about information that was not delivered in the end. And we are at a loss as to what to do because there is this inconsistency. So can you, after hearing these criticisms, can you improve ASAP and add to the fund? I'm sure you will be injecting to the fund. I can hear that as an undertone. But on the other hand, with these 13,000 applications, they're really at a loss. Most of the companies, I can tell you, will be retracting their applications, whether you inject the capital or not. So you have to ASAP improve your procedures. The problem is huge. I've not heard a single soul telling me that they're happy with this vetting process in this fund. If you continue in this way, it's going to be a big problem. But you have the opportunity to turn it around. Can you think of a way to turn it around? Because the present practice is indeed highly problematic. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mok, for the reminder. For the government, we of course want the schemes to be supported by the sector, and we very humbly hear their views and to try to get the support of the sectors as much as possible. This is beyond doubt. But at the same time, we have to understand that we are using public funding from the taxpayers' money of Hong Kong. How we can deploy this appropriately and reasonably and correctly is a responsibility of us public officers. Now, the principle is very clear. As I've mentioned just now, for the re-industrialization scheme, let's say we will have a matching mechanism 1 to 2. And for the distance business operation scheme, we do not need the recipient to come up with a matching fund, but we will have to have a mechanism whereby we can ascertain that the funding is properly used and the costing is suitable. If the costing is unreasonably higher than the industry average, then we have to be effective in our gatekeeping. I also admit that the government does not have all the transparency, and that is why there is a vetting panel made up of persons from the industry so that our applications can be more suitably vetted. I hear Mr. Charles Mok, but I emphasize that the 500 million compared to the number of applications may be small, but we will not be, therefore, turning down applications. We will proactively look for resources so as to satisfy the applicants' needs. So, Mr. Mok, do continue to support us. As for the 10-day vetting period, I apologize to the sector because we did not foresee 13,000 applications, and that is true that we are not able to complete the entire vetting process within 10 days. I hope you will understand. Chair, just a very short word. You give people the feeling that the applicants will be given 100% subsidy, and the funding that you finally grant them is even worse than not giving them anything. You may be funding to the tune of 10% or 20%, and the disappointment is huge. Yes, there may be jacking up of costs in the applications. I actually reminded the secretary that there may be such instances. But on the other hand, let's say if the application wanted to buy these 4 items, and now you're saying, no, you don't buy these 4 items, you buy only this. You doing the choosing for the applicant. I cannot imagine that the industry is so tricky in jacking up the cost, and 70% is fluff or 90% is fluff. I don't think they are as bad as that at all.
You have to look into the problems of your approval process. You need to be reasonable. If I may explain, we have just handled 100 or so cases. If you say 90% of the cases, among the 100 or so, 90%, I think there is a problem with that. Okay, the Bureau will follow that up. Next, Ms. Elizabeth Cott, your second round. Considering DBIS, the business sector is complaining. They are caught short. They think that DBIS will save them. So people are very active in making the application. Response from the SMEs are also good. The IT sector, therefore, has high hopes. Now there are $500 million available only, so you share that out, so each project will be given just a small sum. The SMEs and the IT companies are caught unexpected. They spend a lot of effort in making the application, and now they are between the devil and the deep blue sea. They don't know whether they will continue because the funding is too small for them. I don't believe most of them blow up their budget. you need to help them to continue with the project. I'm afraid that the projects will collapse. Say they ask for $80,000 and you only give them $10,000. What can they do? They can only just walk away. If you just approve a small proportion, they just give up. So your scheme is not successful. You can't save the IT companies, and the small companies are not able to digitalize their business. I hope you increase your funding, and secondly, you can improve your approval process. I've given you some examples. I can give you more. The funds approved do not match the things they apply for. They've applied for one item, and you give funding to them for another item. I really hope that you make good use of public funds. Chairman, if I may go back to INT development in respect of the necessary legislation. A few years ago, we have been discussing that. The legislation is usually lagging behind. We hope that important pieces of legislation can keep up with the times. Now it's said that the IT Bureau will look into the necessary legislation update. Yet, nothing has come forward. We've raised a number of issues on public data. Say, for example, car parking spaces, whether in public car parking spaces or private developments, information is important. If I know whether parking spaces are available, then I'll go there and park my car. Now you say that the private car parking spaces in the private sector, information can only be provided through persuasion. Now the businesses, or rather the property management companies, don't want to provide data because they prefer having more business when more cars are queuing up outside their property. They don't want the cars to move to park to other property. If you just keep on persuading them, they'll just keep dragging their feet. You need to deal with that. We have not seen any change, say in the science park. There are companies researching into electric scooters. The law is not changed. A few days ago, when I put a question to the official at the environment panel, they say that they don't know, that they are thinking about, somebody is thinking about the law. But at the transport panel, they say they are considering, the officials say that, or said that they are considering changing the law. Can you be more transparent? What pieces of legislation will be amended? What are you thinking? You really need to tell us. Otherwise, you can't follow that up. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Kat. With regard to changing the law to keep pace with INT, the Bureau will conduct the relevant research. Ms. Quad is right in pointing out that there should be better communication. We do our best. Each Bureau has its own portfolio. We may not be 100% update on what has been done or what is being done in other bureaus, the latest. I've been in the civil service for decades, and I've come across such problems. We will work together. We'll try to improve that. I can see that I have to get your support before we can deal with the change in legislation. We may not be perfect, but we'll do our best to overcome the problems. Chairman, I think your policy shouldn't just favor the companies in the science park or the cyberport. Say, for example, the green code, green health code, or health code system. You give business to companies in the health, in this park, science park, and the cyberports. I think that's unfair because there are companies who are working on the same thing outside the cyberport or the science park. Well, we are working step by step forward. When we have a new policy, we ask the cyberport or the science park to look into that. Say our policy is to do it step by step. But if a policy which may cause some problems within the sector, we may try to listen to the views of the stakeholders. Yes, Mr. Lam will speak on open data. In the past, the bureaus and departments have been responding positively. As for data owned by private companies and public bodies, the Transport Department has been talking to the operators. Last year, City Bus, New World, First Bus, New World First Bus, and Lantau Bus have made public their data. And some private car parks have made their data public, in particular those in Kowloon East. We believe that the government, with the lead of the government in disclosing data of the car parks, other private sector companies will release their data. I think more than 200 or so companies have agreed to release their data gate on our website, and they will there are altogether 4,000 or so. Now you've talked to the KMB for years, and you can keep talking about it. But how long will they stall? Keep on stalling? I think you should make use of a law to make public data available. Are you not therefore giving the impression that you bias towards the private sector? Next, Ms. Chiang. Yes, I'd like to say something more on this. Now we have so many officials here. How many have visited the high-tech expo in Shenzhen, organized in November each year? Has Secretary been to that? Chairman, I've been there twice, not every year. What about the colleagues of yours? Ms. Chiang, I have to admit that I didn't go last year. I hope that this year, after the pandemic, I can go.
充滿不同嘅機遇咧，可以令我哋。
The digital world is full of opportunities, and we will capitalize on that. It's 11th of November this year. I hope by then the situation will be all right. Many officials feel that they are public servants. They just follow the footsteps of their predecessors. I think the policy secretaries and also the permanent secretaries shouldn't think that they are just public servants. You are leading Hong Kong. Now this is about new technology. It's for the future. you have heavy responsibilities. So I'm really anxious in asking my questions. Let me suggest, Mr. Chairman, the Policy Secretary and also the Bureau should organize a seminar, large-scale seminar with different trades and industries on the future of innovation and technology, the advantages of Hong Kong, people's views, listen to their advice. Well, I don't know whether I dare not ask you whether you own shares and what sort of shares you own. Some civil servants only have shares of traditional banks and property companies. But the companies in the HKEX of their highest market capitalization are not banks nor property companies. Now some some Chinese tech firms listed in the United States, some of them have come back to be listed in Hong Kong. In the past, they didn't like Hong Kong, didn't like being listed in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is too small. I think we are lagging behind. I think it's time to take stock. We need to dig deeper into certain areas. We need to be focused in certain areas in which we have advantages. You don't need to worry about talent. I have this theory of ants. If we have decided on, or if the government has decided on developing blockchain, for example, I've seen some professors conducting research on herbal medicine transactions through blockchain. That's another area which we should consider. And then there is another thing which I feel that Hong Kong has an advantage. The FSTB submitted several bills. These bills are for future development. That's great. Well, the Policy Secretary, you're just new to the seat. You've just in your seat for a few months. You should listen to the views. Don't just draw up things behind closed doors. Listen to everybody, not just panel members. I also want to encourage the Secretary, the Permanent Secretary, young officials, go out and look around. Whether it's Singapore or other neighboring territories, they have flagship products. It's not that they don't do other things. Other things are just supporting or ancillary or side orders. But they do have main courses. Look at Taiwan. The chips. Mainland has to catch up. Taiwan is small, and Taiwan is number one in the world.
And then there's Europe as well. It is not like 100 flowers bloom. Not like that. You think of the Nokia of the past, Ericsson from Norway, etc. And what about Denmark? They sell pork, but 40% of the pork is supplied by Denmark, and that is sufficient for Denmark. And Hong Kong is so small, with just a few million population. How should we develop going forward? I say we must do more research. We should talk to the different sectors. And even Mr. Cheong Ah Fong, our colleague here, why are people investing in Tencent, Alibaba? Well, I'm sure you know as well, Mr. Sit, you know, and everybody can see that this is the future of the world, and it is all that simple. Yes, I think, Ms. Zhang, I think Mr. Sit understands. Give him a bit of time. That is right, Mr. Chair. In the past 10 years or so, the biggest companies in the world are really all IT companies or technology companies. They are among the biggest companies in the world, and I can see that this will be the main direction of development for Hong Kong going forward. Ms. Zhang had talked about listening to different sectors, and this is exactly what we've been doing with great efforts. In the past 2 months, I have met with over 30 organizations, and each of them have given us very valuable views, allowing us to adjust our direction. And we have received 19 written submissions this time, and we will go through them in detail to see how we can set our direction right. As for symposiums to hear everybody's voice, we will be thinking about that too. Our colleagues have gone to different conferences, whether it is locally within China or outside of the country, to see what is the future direction. We definitely have the will to lead Hong Kong to have a very long-ranging development in INT in Hong Kong. We thank Ms. Chang for her well-wishing. We will do so. Chair, I'm very happy to hear the Secretary in saying that, because the Secretary, the Permanent Secretary of this Bureau, you are leaders. You are not public servants. You are truly leaders. And we've talked about robotics before and all that, because I've come from the machinery industry. Over 30 years ago, we have been producing robots. If you want to research that now, it is wasting time. But that is fine. What I feel is that we should find our competitive edge. So more efforts, Mr. Secretary. Right. We will close the discussion for the item here. This is the last regular meeting of this panel. I would like to thank members for your support over the past period of time, and for the administration representative in presenting themselves at the meeting. We thank you. And also, in the July LETRO meeting, we will be submitting the work report of this panel. If there are no other questions, we'll close the meeting here. Thank you.